Welcome back to HTML and CSS. In this video, I'm going to be going over your HTML building block basics. This is going to cover content that you would find in chapter 2 of your reading. So just kind of a heads up on that. And I try to keep my lecture pretty similar to the order that things are introduced in the book, and then also the examples that are given in the book. So what my recommendation would be is for you to watch through the video first, and then once you've done that, go through, do all of the reading, do all of the examples in the reading, and that's going to help so that way as you're reading it, you'll be able to remember back to us talking about it in the lecture video. And then your homework is going to be based off of a lot of the examples that are in the reading. It's really similar to the assignments that are actually in the book. I actually wrote my own assignments, but the assignments are really similar to the assignments in the end of the chapter of the book. And then also, because of that, they're built in a way that they basically scaffold off of the examples in the reading. So I'm not going to grade those examples or anything, but I would really recommend that you go and you do all of the examples in every chapter. If you've done them while you were going through these video lectures, that's fine. You don't have to worry about it because you've already done it. But I've seen a huge significant difference between students who go through and they do the reading and they do all of the examples along the way and they get that practice versus students that kind of just jump ahead and do the assignments. And they're going to be really similar where if you are kind of looking for, how do I write this syntax? What sort of property am I supposed to use for this? If you're not really sure, chances are there's going to be an example that's in the reading that's really similar. It'll just be tweaked a little bit and it'll give you a really great starting place to look at. So really use your textbook. And that's why it's also really important that you have the right edition of the book. All right, so anyways, content that this is going to be covering is going to pair with chapter 2, just kind of a heads up on that. And in previous videos, I had mentioned you want to make sure that you have your student server space. That's because after you go through and you do this, you're going to actually start working on your first assignment. And so you want to make sure that you know where you're eventually going to save your files to. For the first assignment, it's going to be okay if you upload your file just as a zip folder to Canvas directly. It's going to be fine if you don't put your files on the student server space. If you want to go ahead and test it though, you could go ahead and try to use FileZilla and the directions for that. And that gives you a nice jump start on trying to do that. Then if you find that you can't figure out how to do it, you have plenty of time to contact me and I can meet with you and I can go over how you can do that in the future. But you want to make sure that your student server space is working fine so that there's plenty of time. If you do need to put in like a support ticket or something, I can help you with that. All right, so when you are first creating a website, before you even go in and you start coding, you're usually going to be creating a wireframe or working from a wireframe. And to help give you a little bit of reference for that, we can take a look at your first assignment. So in this first assignment, there's directions for what you're going to be doing along the way. And there's this sitemap, and your reading will go over a little bit more as to what a sitemap is. But a sitemap basically explains the organization of your files. So in this case, we have a very simple website that you're going to be creating throughout the duration of the semester. You're going to start first with 2 pages, and then you're going to slowly add more pages to it. And this sitemap actually helps demonstrate a hierarchical structure. Let me see if I can find a good picture. All right, so this is a little bit blurry, but I really like this illustration. This is a good website, and this is actually taken from one of the books that we teach in one of the classes. But so this is looking at the structure, and a sitemap is really showing the organization of the files. So what this is saying is you have your first link, the one that you go to when you first land on the page, and then the structure of how it links to these other pages. And not only is it showing the navigation structure, but it's also showing how you might organize those files in your own folder structure. Now, when you're working on your files in this class, everything is going to be so small and simple that you can just kind of put everything in the same folder and you don't really have to worry about it. But imagine that you have a very large website. Maybe it's one like this that has a hierarchy to the structure of it, and you have your landing page. Then you might have a subfolder with different groups of pages. So maybe it's a portfolio, and so you've got your portfolio folder, and it's going to have links inside of that. And then it could give you, maybe it's graphic design, maybe it's video, maybe it's UX examples, and you've got all of these as separate pages that are within that folder. And then maybe over here you've got another section, whatever it might be. So hierarchy, you're working from most important, but also most broad. And then you are slowly getting more and more specific. And you'll notice we have links that are going back and forth throughout. And some of this isn't necessarily drawn in. With a navigation like this, you would have the ability to go back to the home page as well. So linear sitemaps are going to be something where you're going in a specific order, and you'll notice that in this it's showing that you go straight forward and straight back. You're not deviating from that path. And there's a couple places where you might use this. Let's say that you are going through training at a job, and they want to make sure that you go through every single piece of that training. And so they're going to funnel you through that where you could go back to a previous stage, but they really want you to kind of keep going through it. Same thing, maybe you're taking a quiz or something on Canvas, and you've got each page is on a separate page, and you have to go through and answer some questions, hit next, and then go on to the next process. And then there is nonlinear, which is basically saying that there's not necessarily a rhyme or reason to where you're going. This would work better for a smaller website where people aren't going to get so lost by not having a whole lot of hierarchy in it. But generally speaking, you're going to have something that's more composite, where you have a little bit of everything. There's going to be some sort of hierarchy structure to the website, but there could be certain paths that are going to be linear. A really good example of this might be an e-commerce website, where maybe when you get to the section where you are going through the shopping cart and you're going through the purchasing, they might really simplify down the navigation so that way you're not as likely to exit the path of purchasing. And it's going to funnel you through. It's going to say, fill out your contact information, fill out your shipping information, your billing information, double check your order, and then hit submit. And you technically could leave that process, but you'll notice that that's very simplified. And then throughout the rest of the site, while you're shopping and looking around, you might have more of your hierarchy structure throughout the rest of the process. All right, so that's going to be a sitemap. And you'll notice that for your homework, you're going to have a very simple one. It's just going to be your home page and then a couple of other pages, and they're all going to link within the same folder. And then this next section, this is called a wireframe. And a wireframe is actually, there's two different ways to think about a wireframe. There's this visual component of your wireframe, which helps give you a guide. You can think of it like a blueprint or a sketch. I like to think of it as the skeleton of your website. And then as you start adding styles, you start adding on the more superficial details, and you start building up the anatomy. But this is that underlying structure, that skeleton, and these are the actual pieces that you build in your HTML. And so it's really nice to have this drawing of a wireframe. So usually before you start, you would have some sort of guide that either you create or someone gives to you that is giving you this idea of a wireframe. And just doing a search real quick for different wireframes, There's all sorts of general standards of what you might have. Generally speaking, you're going to have a logo in the top left corner, and that logo will take you back to your home page. Search and navigation are usually at the top. Usually you have a header. In this case, it's not a very distinct header, but you can still imagine that there would be a header here, and then there's this navigation that is inside of the header. Here there's actually a secondary navigation. And then you might have what's called a hero image, or in this case there's a banner ad that's in the top, usually something kind of visually striking. And then you have your main content. And then this isn't showing it, but let's see if we can find some other examples. So this image, it's more of a sketch, but it gives you kind of this idea of this next part, which is the footer in the bottom. This looks like it's maybe more of a mobile design. It's got a much smaller navigation. There's still a little spot here for the logo in the top left. There's this hero image at the top, usually some sort of graphic. And then the content split up into these smaller sections. And then there's this footer that in this case has different social media information. So when you are starting off with a design, you are sketching out this information. It could be actually sketching it out on a piece of paper. It could be using different templates and cutting it apart and gluing it back together into a design. It could be designing it in a software. Like this one, you can tell that this is being created in some sort of software. And that's something where if you continue taking classes, there's classes that will actually teach you how to use this different software to actually design and develop all of these wireframes. And you can actually simulate what it would be like to go from page to page. But this is going to be what's called a wireframe. Now, when we're working with HTML, we're going to be thinking about the wireframe from the code side of things rather than this design side of things, but they really go hand in hand, and they're both considered wireframes. All right, so here we've got our wireframe, and it's telling us there's going to be a header at the top, then there's going to be a navigation, that's where you have all of your buttons, and then there's going to be the main content with, this is a div, and a div is used to group together some sort of content, and then we have our footer. So you're going to have kind of an idea of what to expect, and then this is a picture of what the final result should look close to. There might be some small differences, but you can see we've got this JCCC Web Development Digital Media. If you kind of look back and forth, that is going to be our header. And then we've got the navigation with these 4 links is underneath of that. Then everything else that's underneath of that is going to be in this main. This div is going to be used to group together this contact information. And then there's a footer at the bottom, and the footer is going to be adding in this copyright and email address information. So this is letting us know how we're going to split our pieces up. All right, so now that you have an idea of wireframes and sitemaps, we're going to actually start introducing our HTML elements. So I have created another video which you may have watched before this that's just talking about how to create a basic template. I'm going to go over that same information again, but this time since I'm introducing the HTML content, we're going to be able to go into a lot more detail on it than we would have done before. So I'm going to just create a new text file, and I would really encourage that you go through and you actually type out everything that I have in the videos. And basically, if you need to pause and follow the video, you're going to learn the best by actually typing things out yourself and actually experiencing it. When I used to teach drawing classes, it's that same thing. It's not necessarily the drawing that really matters, is the fact that your arm is going through the motion of drawing. And I very much feel like it's the same thing when you're working with learning how to write code. The more that you actually write it yourself, you're making your hands familiar with typing everything out. You're getting used to building things up from scratch. And the more you practice it, the less you're going to have to think about it when you're doing it. You're going to be able to kind of just jump in and work on it yourself. So I'd really encourage you. I know it depends a lot on your setup and how easy it is to maybe have video playing at the same time that you have your text editor open, but I really would like for you to try to watch the video and type along with me. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do File Save As. And I've just been putting everything into this week 1 folder, and that's going to be fine. So I'm going to call this just HTML Basics will work fine. And then I'm going to choose this format as HTML. Now, I'm just a reminder, as you can already tell, I'm on a Mac, but if you are having any difficulties trying to figure out how to save your files as the right file type, again, just contact me and let me know, and I can always do a Zoom meeting or something with you and help you figure out what this might look like. Or what you could do is you could go to some of my older videos on YouTube where I've recorded those on a Windows computer, and you can kind of see what that process looks like from those videos instead. All right, so first thing, we are going to say which version of HTML we're going to be using. So the syntax for that is going to look like this. We've got our tags, and each of our HTML pieces is going to be written in these tags with these greater than, less than symbols. Some of them are going to have this exclamation mark in front of it. You can write doc type all in caps or all lowercase, but you can't interchange them. So if you're doing capital D, you have to do everything else capital. And by writing this, the browser is going to know that we are working with HTML5. And then next, what I would like for you to do is always write your name and the date in the file, which for me, don't copy off my date, do your own date. But for me, today is the 27th. And this, you'll notice we have another exclamation mark at the beginning, 2 hyphens to start the comment, 2 hyphens to end the comment. And then you want to just be careful. I mentioned this in the template video, but these aren't decorative. They're functional. The hyphens are. So you can't just add them in wherever you want. That basically saying this is where the beginning of the comment is. This is where the end of the comment is. The next piece is going to be creating an HTML tag. And you'll notice that most of our tags are going to have an opening and a closing tag. And the closing tag will have this /, and that's going to be how it terminates it. And then everything that is going to be HTML is going to go inside of this HTML tag. And we're going to have 2 pieces, the head and the body. The head section is going to be all the information that we want to pass to the browser behind the scenes, and the body is everything that we want visible on the page. And if you need to, you can always use your comments to write notes to yourself about that. So you could say here, head section is used to pass information on to the browser. And you could even give yourself examples. So this would be like if you've got a link to a style sheet or any sort of JavaScript or other scripts, you can use this to have the information on the browser's tabs show up. If you're familiar with, let me see. These little icons here, we're going to get to those in a further chapter, but these are called favorites icons. These icons are something that you can designate in the head section. Same thing with this text that shows up on the tab. That also is part of that information. So the 2 main pieces we're going to have for starters is going to be the title. And like I had mentioned for our template video, this is the information that ends up being on the tab. And I could just add a note here. So we could say this information shows up on the browser tab. Next piece is going to be a meta tag, and in the future we'll look at other things that you can do with meta tags, but for now we're just interested in setting the character set, and we're going to set that to UTF-8. Now if you get an error with this, more often than not it is because you have typed the T and the F in the wrong order. I've seen this a lot, and it's just a really simple typo that happens a whole lot. So if you do try to validate your code and you're staring at it and you just can't think of what could possibly be wrong with it, it's probably that you've got the F and the T switched around. That's usually what it is. And you'll notice this one doesn't have a closing tag. It's just going to have an opening tag. There's going to be a few elements that are going to be like that. You just have to kind of memorize which ones. And this is going to set the character set, and I mentioned this in a previous video, but it really goes beyond what we really need to know in this class. If you're really curious about it, you can kind of look it up for yourself and just kind of look up character sets and everything. The kind of closest thing I like to compare it to is just if you look at your keyboard, there's all of these different keys and they have the different labels that are on them. But when you're actually typing those characters, your computer sees something completely different than what you're actually typing out. There's different numbers that are associated with all those different inputs. And it's just making sure that when you are typing in all of these different characters, that what ultimately gets shown on the browser matches what you are actually typing and working with. And that's just kind of the simplest way, I think, of being able to talk about it in a way that's relatable, though it's a little bit more complex than that. There's not going to be a reason why you need to have anything else from this. And actually, this would be a good point to go back to our HTML tag, because we're kind of building out our basic template at the same time as doing this. And there's going to be different attributes, and character set is an attribute. Meta is the tag, the HTML element that we're working with. And then character set, that is saying there is something that we want to specify about the meta tag, and we want to choose this character set, this attribute, and we want to set it equal to specifically, and that's why we put equals and then in quotes, UTF-8. And so this is our attribute, then this is our value for it. So we can go back into any of our opening tags, and if we want to, we could call up an attribute. For the most part, a lot of them will have similar attributes. There's going to be some that are specific, like meta is going to have a lot of specific attributes to it that you wouldn't type in for other HTML elements. But this one, HTML, we have a language attribute, and this really helps to make our websites more accessible. And it also really helps with search engines because it can be able to know and detect that our website is going to be in English. And then if your website was in a different language, then you could go in and you could change that to something else. So that's a really helpful tool. Now, depending when you are validating, if you don't include a meta character set, title, or language, you might get a warning or you might get an error. And that's why I like to include this in the template. And then I also like to include it again because if you're getting errors, you want to make sure that you double check these things. This is the sort of thing where when you're going and you're doing the homework assignment, I'm going to assume that you remember to do this from watching this lecture. And so I'm not necessarily going to tell you, you need to have a title, you need to have the meta character set, you need to have the language set for HTML. This is common practice, and it's something that you're going to need to learn to remember to always add. So make sure you do that later on your homework. All right, so for now, that's really all we need to have in our head section. Down the line, we're going to end up adding more things in the future, but at least for this week, we're really just focusing on HTML. We're not worrying yet about our CSS. All right, so usually when I teach face-to-face classes, I'll usually open up a Word document and I'll just kind of write notes in here so that way you know what information is most important. And if I need to, I'll do that. But I think what might be best, just so that way we get the best use out of this screen space, is if we actually type the notes directly into our code. And then it'll also add something to be on our page. So we're going to just kind of organize things and then kind of introduce them as we go along. So the body section, and let's go ahead and add a comment above this. So I'll just say this information is what is visible on the browser page. So everything underneath this is going to be what's visible. We're going to start with our headings. Usually on a website, you will have different headings, and it helps demonstrate the hierarchy of information. With your heading 1, your H1 is going to be, I'll just do this, most important, usually title of website. So usually this would be the first thing that you would see at the very top of your website page is going to be an H1. You aren't going to have multiple H1s. It really wouldn't make sense to have it because this is the thing that is most important. It gives you the focus for the rest of your page. So your H1 is what really is your title. And that's where a lot of times people get confused because they think this title is going to be the title on their page, but really that information is going to that tab, which is why I wanted to include that in our little note here. So our H1, heading 1, most important, usually the title of the website. And then we have H1 to H6. And you'll notice each of these has an opening tag and an ending tag. Now we don't need to go in and add this for every single one, heading 3, most important. But the idea is you can have multiple H2s. This is where I've had some students get confused. So as you are thinking about the organization of your website, you might have an H3, and that H3 fits underneath of this first point. And then maybe you've got your next H2 and you've got another heading 3 that fits underneath that hierarchy, and then you might have another one. But anytime you go on to the next level, you should have one that comes before it that it fits inside of. So that way it's always getting more and more specific and it's fitting under a structure. Chances are you're not going to get below an H3, but we do technically have a heading 4, heading 5, and then a heading 6. And you'll notice this is by default, it's adding in the end tag for me. And then just a nice tip, which it depends on what kind of keyboard you have. If you are on a laptop, you might not have this key on your keyboard, but if you have kind of a full keyboard where you have the number pad and everything, above the arrow keys, there's this nice key that says end, and end will go to the very end of your line. And I use it all the time while I'm typing, and it just quickly gets me back to the end. There's also one above it that's called home, and it helps you get to the beginning of your line. So I I do a lot of these kind of little shortcuts as I type. So if you're less familiar with your keyboard, that might be kind of helpful for you. All right, I'm gonna actually save this. So if you could go up to File and Save, but if you want to practice your key commands, you can, if you're on a Mac, Command S, or if you are on Windows, Control S will save it. And then I want to find this file, and I put this in week 1's folder, and it's this HTML basics. I'm going to say I want to open it with Firefox. And so this is what we have so far. See if I can get these to both be on the screen at the same time. So by default, the browser is making it so these headings are bold, and then they get kind of smaller and smaller as they go along. It looks like I've got a couple typos, and I can just save that and refresh. So you can see where we've got our heading 1, that's essentially our title, and then any subpoints that we might have is going to go in our heading 2, and then we have heading 3 to help organize our thoughts further and further. Probably the best example that I can compare this to would be a textbook. With a textbook, you have the chapter title information, and then from the chapter, you have sections that go into further detail on a topic. And then if it wants to break it down into even further and further information or topics, it's going to change those headings to heading 3, heading 4, heading 5, etc. So again, you're probably going to use the first 3. And if you don't like how it styles things, this is actually a really good point for thinking about your HTML. Right now, you don't have any ways really being able to control the styles. And so you might be tempted to say, well, I like the size of a heading 4, so I'm going to just use a heading 4. But eventually we're going to add CSS, which will help us add our styles. And you'll be able to go in and say exactly how you want your H2 and your H3 to look. So we want to make sure that we keep our structure, our HTML, separate from our styles, our CSS. We want to do all of our styling with CSS, and we want our structure to really be that blueprint wireframe for us to work with. So it's very important to have it structurally make sense and organizationally make sense. It's very much like creating a Word document, basically, and then we can kind of go to town and just style everything eventually later. All right, so these are going to be our different headings. And if you wanted to, you could add a note, maybe another comment. These are our headings, whatever you might want to put in there. You don't have to comment this much. I'm just doing this to kind of help with our note taking. It's kind of up to you if you want to take notes on your own on paper or something instead. All right, so the next thing we're going to have is going to be a paragraph. So this is a paragraph element. It is written with just lowercase p. It has that opening and end tag. And let's say that you have a very long paragraph and you want it to break up and go onto another line. You can go and add different breaks inside of a paragraph. Break is designated with a BR. Actually, let me leave this right here for now. So I'm going to save that and refresh over here. So I mentioned before that white space gets ignored, and there's some times where you want to have white space, and so this BR stands for break. So that's something. Now, since we're writing our notes in here, we're going to have to add some notes, but you could say a break is made with a BR tag. And to have it actually show up right, I'm just going to put it in quotes. maybe we'll say this helps the text return to the next line. And this is a good example of how if we don't tell it to, our text is just going to do a continual horizontal scroll. And so something that's really handy is if you go to View and you go to Word Wrap. So yours might say, I think it's Alt C if you're on Windows, and then mine has this Option C. And that's going to make it word wrap, so that way we can kind of keep having things on the screen at the same time. All right, so we've got our break tag, and it's just kind of helping. Otherwise, if you have text that you know that you just want it to be in different paragraphs, you can just keep adding paragraph tags, or you could just keep, if you know that everything is going to be in a huge paragraph block together, just keep adding it to the same paragraph. Another way that you can control the organization of your content is by using a horizontal rule. I'll just write this out. You can use a so you can use an HR tag to create a line break, also called a horizontal rule. And we'll just create one right underneath of it. And this is just creating this line. Now this could help you kind of break up different sections of content. It's kind of up to you how you might want to use it. We're going to come up with a style later that I think works a little bit better visually because you have a little bit more control over it, but you might want to use this to split content. Next we have a block quote. So this is used to quote information that would fit into a larger block. You might have used something like this before when writing an essay. Usually the rule, I think if I remember right, is if you have about 2 to 3 sentence long quotes, that usually when you're writing an essay, you need to style it differently where you indent it on both sides, and it makes it a very obvious block. So this is going to do the same thing, where if you're quoting something, it's essentially going to style it a little bit differently. I think the default style doesn't do a whole lot, but eventually you'll be able to style it how you want. Usually something like this, you would maybe, it does indent it at least, but you might also make it smaller. You might make it italicized, but that's going to allow for you to work with something as a quote. And then there are what are called phrase elements. They help the browser interpret style. So these are kind of more of a older fashioned way of adding style to things. An example would be having something be bolded, and I'll just add in an example here. So having B stands for bold, and so that would bold the text here. I'm going to save that, refresh. So you can see phrase elements now has bold around it. Now there's an equivalent, and you'll be able to find a whole table of this information in your book, which will help to, if you'd like to see it all written out. But there's another one that's called strong. And the difference between bold and strong is that strong, if you're using an assistive screen reader kind of technology, is going to actually say the words with an emphasis to make them stand out, versus bold is just visually bolding the information. So there's going to be a specific emphasis that is given when you use strong. Same thing for using italics. We could go here and we could add in an I to italicize all of this. And when you do something like this, it's kind of up to you if you want to put it all in the same place, if this feels organized enough for you. When you have something like this, it's called nested, where you are putting a tag inside of another one. So this gets kind of confusing for you. What you might do is have the first thing, and then you might have the next thing inside of it, and then indent it so you can kind of keep track of your tags a little bit easier. If it's something small like this, I think it works either way, but you also want to make sure that it's going in the same order. Think of it again, I mentioned the Russian nesting dolls before, but we have the italics is inside of the block quote, which means the italics has to end before the block quote can end. They can't cross over each other. So italics, the equivalent of that would be an emphasis tag. So bold has a strong tag. So bold looks the same as strong, and italics looks the same as emphasis, but strong and emphasis are the ones that are spoken with more emphasis, versus bold and italics are just visually italicized or bolded. We could just hit save again and kind of see now our quote is italicized. We've got that bold as well. All right, I'm going to stop the video here just because I don't want these videos to get too long. This really covers the text components of our HTML. And then I'm going to create another video where we're going to look at creating lists, and then another one where we talk about creating links, and then another one where we start talking about the overall pieces of our wireframe in more detail. But this one I'd really like to keep more based off of the text pieces and just kind of a general introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and end this, and then you can go on to the next video.